I'm getting ready to submit a paper to the International Computer Gaming Association. This time it's about AI for the endgame tables of international checkers. And I remember 2 years ago, another time I was busy writing, and not only did I learn a lot about the computer games themselves, but I learned a lot about life. What had happened was in 2020, I initially had denials about the whole COVID situation, but then a friend of mine contracted long COVID. He has since passed away from other matters. And another friend of mine committed suicide over stresses related to COVID, unfortunately. And it made me worry about my own life and what would happen to my computer games if something were to happen to me. So I went on a huge spree of just writing and writing and writing and writing, making sure that all of the ideas that I have would be transferred onward. I called it Operation Warp Speed because of how bizarrely insane I went writing stuff. And I was working at Washington Technology University. At the time, I had a few colleagues who needed me to fill in for odd hours because they had childcare issues. One of my coworkers had a niece who had nobody to care for her because her sister had COVID-19. And after I had finished writing 2 papers that I submitted to ICGA in 2020, I wanted her to look over what was going on. She said, okay, I'll take a look, but she never got around to it. And it made me realize that in a pandemic or in any sort of emergency, when push comes to shove, really everybody is on their own. And in retrospect, if it were convenient for me to fill in those hours, maybe I could do that. But in retrospect, it could have been okay to say no as well. Now, this time around, see, one of the problems is that people have some emotional attachment to somebody needing to take care of children, right? Because most of my colleagues have children. Not too many people can understand wanting to have some time to write a publication, right? And so oftentimes I'm really, really on my own. I remember in 2020 when I was actually competing at the ICGA, and also when I was giving the talks for the papers, I didn't get a whole lot of slack, right? I still had to, even though it was remote work, I still had to log in during the conferences were mostly at night because they were held in, I think one of them was in Japan, the other one was in South Korea, if I remember correctly, and I still had to work the next day. And meanwhile, as soon as my colleagues have any issues with one child being just a little bit off, right, they take off, right, and most people get a little bit emotionally attached to it. So I learned not to think of people around you as friends, but to think of them more as associates, right? If it makes sense for you to mutually help each other, do it, but don't think of them as a friend, and definitely don't think of them as a family member. And even your family, just try to treat them as associates, right? If it makes sense to mingle with them, do it. If it doesn't, if your family doesn't accept you for your sexuality, then check out of it, right? The pandemic has really taught me that most people don't have that many friends. You may have a lot of associates if you stop to think about it. The other thing I learned is that when you make a promise to somebody, promises are made to be broken, by the way. There are consequences to breaking your promises, sure. But when those consequences start to become smaller than the consequences of acting on it, then you have to break them. So for example, this time around when I was writing the paper, I got really, really burned out. And by burnt out, I mean that I still loved everything I was doing. I'm working at a tutoring center. I was working on SAT prep with the students, and I really loved my job. What I didn't love was how quickly everything was rushing at me because I was burnt out from writing the international checkers papers. And finally, one day when I had a student who was already doing okay with his studies, I checked out. I said, I don't feel right, and I don't have any COVID tests on hand. I don't think it would be a good idea for me for us to meet up today. Which was kind of true. I didn't have any COVID tests on hand, and I wasn't feeling right for sure. And you know what? I'm not a doctor. I don't know if COVID-19 contributes to mental stress. It might, right? And it might be better for me to wait for a test to come around before I go back to the center. Although I gotta be careful, because the last time I used this excuse, I actually ended up catching COVID-19. But I chose COVID-19 as my excuse because I could live with it. I mean, I feel I take good care of myself. I've caught COVID-19 3 times already. I even have a little bit of a numbering system. Every time I catch COVID-19, I just add 19 to the number. I say I have COVID-38, I had COVID-57, and next time it will be COVID-76. So I feel okay about that. I'll have to be. I have in the past lied about deaths in the family. What else? Car accidents. I'll have to be careful about not using those because I really jinxed myself with the COVID-19. I can live with COVID-19. I can live with maybe my car breaking down, or maybe I'll say that I broke up with my girlfriend because I can live with those things. Maybe I'll say, you get the idea, right? I'm trying to think of an excuse that people will understand, but I can live with, right? Because if I say it and it happens, right? I don't think saying that Grandpa passed away would jinx him to actually pass away, but it could happen coincidentally, right? And I just feel really bad if it did. I don't know. I wonder how people would feel. But anyways, I learned that don't confuse associates with friends, and I learned that it's okay to break a promise. You have to weigh the pros and cons of doing so, obviously. It's not free to do it, but if the pros and cons make sense to do it, it happens in business all the time too, right?